So there's one thing I haven't spent much time talking about on this show, even though it's a major problem for most perfectionists. And that thing is overthinking. And I'm not immune to it either. So it's a problem that I really do want to help you solve. And I have good news. The solution, it's not easy, but it is simple. And a simple solution is one that you can understand and start to implement right away without a lot of fuss. And if you can get started with a simple solution, you can build up to being consistent and then to mastering that solution until finally it's integrated into the way that you show up in your life by default. So, yeah, I stand a simple solution. The reason I can offer you a simple solution to help you neutralize 90% of the overthinking that happens in your brain is because I'm going to break down the overthinking problem into its simplest parts. No matter how big of a problem overthinking is for you, and no matter how often you catch yourself doing it, there are only ever three types of overthinking. So I'm going to spend the rest of this episode explaining what they are and how to neutralize each one of them. Ready? Let's go. Good day, good people. Welcome back to episode 90 of the Life Edit Project podcast. As always, I'm your favorite life coach and podcast host, Coach Elizabeth, and I am glad that you are here rocking with me again this week. Before we jump into the meat and potatoes of this episode, I want to first give a shout out to my listener bae of the week. So in case you're new around here, I like to show love to the listeners that show love to me. So when you leave me a 5-star rating and review on either Apple Podcasts or Spotify and even sometimes YouTube, I will give you a shout out here on the show. And this week, I am shouting out a listener with the username Able to Produce. They left me a 5-star review over on Apple Podcasts, and it is titled A Quick Dose of Therapy. Here's what it says. Listening to this podcast was like a deep conversation with your bestie. Thank you, Able to Produce. I take that compliment as high praise. Even though I'm your favorite life coach and not one of your little friends, I like the idea of this podcast giving bestie vibes. You know, if your bestie was trained in active listening, inquiry, holding space, and facilitating self-discovery while helping you process your feelings and reach your goals without pushing their own personal agenda on you. You know? All right, so Able to Produce, you are my listener bae of the week, and I appreciate you for tuning in, and I appreciate the kind feedback. If you, my other lovely listeners, want a chance to be listener bae of the week on a future episode, just go ahead and drop me a review. If you don't know how to do that, I've got step-by-step instructions for you on my website at lifeeditproject.com/podcast, and you will find the link to that in the show notes because I like to make life easy for you whenever I can. All right, let's dive in and talk about overthinking, shall we? Now, you know the first thing I want to do is frame up this topic so that we're all on the same page. What the heck is overthinking? It's something I hear my clients and honestly a lot of people in my community talk about pretty often. They are usually complaining that they're doing it and that overthinking is a problem. But what exactly is it? Well, when most people say they're overthinking, what they mean is that they're thinking too much, that they're having too many thoughts. But my position as a coach is that there is no such thing as thinking too much. We all have human brains, and our brains are literally thinking machines. If our brains are doing brain things, then that in and of itself is not a problem. When we say we're overthinking, the problem isn't the amount of thoughts we're having. It's the nature of our thoughts that is not helpful. And those thoughts are getting in the way of us showing up the way we want to and doing the things that we want to do. And for the record, whenever we're not showing up the way we want and not doing the things we want to do, there's always some kind of unhelpful thoughts or beliefs that's at the root of it. So you've been procrastinating, it's your thoughts. You've been saying yes too much and overcommitting, it's your thoughts, right? Maybe not just your thoughts, but your thoughts are definitely playing a role. But what's special about overthinking is that we're actually aware that our thoughts are tripping us up. We notice the thoughts. They're in the forefront of our awareness instead of in the background. And so because we notice them, we think that there are too many of them and that if we could just have less thoughts, it would fix everything. And that's the way that most of us try to solve for overthinking. We try to think less. We try to distract ourselves with different unrelated thoughts, or we try to drown out the unhelpful thoughts with friendlier, more comfortable, more comforting thoughts. Or we chastise ourselves for having the unhelpful thoughts to begin with, and then we try to shame ourselves into acting the way we think we would if we didn't have those thoughts. And yes, some of these things might work some of the time, but they don't work well and they don't work consistently. And none of these things that we do, distracting ourselves or drowning out the thoughts, none of those things actually solve the real problem, which isn't how much we're thinking, but rather what we're thinking and how we're thinking about whatever the situation is. So, if you're taking notes, this is where you start writing things down. There are only ever 3 types of overthinking that you might be engaged in, and I'm going to give you the play to handle each one of them. So, first up is ruminating. Ruminating is fixating on the negative aspects of past experiences. This might look like replaying an awkward conversation over and over again in your mind, or berating yourself for doing something like losing your temper with your kid, or obsessing over a mistake you made in your last presentation at work, whatever. Having thoughts about past experiences isn't bad, but only thinking about the parts that seem to have gone wrong in the past and only bringing those missteps and all of our negative feelings about them into the present moment is extremely unhelpful. Because this type of thinking has you wanting to change the past. And so you get stuck in the past. And since you can't change the past, you can't do anything in the present. So the antidote to ruminating, if that's the type of overthinking you're doing, is to redirect your thoughts to either how you can avoid making similar missteps in the future, or to find a helpful lesson that you learned as a result of that past experience. So that's the first type of overthinking. The second type of overthinking that is possible is what I'm calling forecasting. And forecasting is fixating on the uncertainty of the future. So this can look like imagining all the ways that your family might react to news that you're starting a new job and thinking of a rebuttal for every critique or question that you think they might throw at you. Or maybe it looks like doing the research to prepare 3 different proposals for your boss for a new project, even though you haven't even had your first concept meeting yet. Or it can look like you trying to figure out how drop shipping works for international purchases for your new t-shirt business, even though you don't have a single design ready to sell and you don't have any international customers. Okay, so again, forecasting is fixating on the uncertainty of the future. And it is not bad to think about the future in and of itself. And it's not bad to try to plan for the future. In fact, planning for the future is generally smart. But when you start thinking so far ahead into the future that you can't make any real plans right now, or when you start to think of future problems that are barely even possibilities as being urgent to solve right now, it doesn't help you take action on the challenges that are right in front of you. And so the antidote to forecasting is to redirect your thoughts back to the certainty of the present. And you can do this by asking yourself questions like, what do I know right now that is certain or reasonably likely? Or ask yourself, what's the simplest, most productive next step I can take right now without taking an unnecessary risk? So when your brain is snagged on uncertainty of the future, you bring your thoughts back to what you know in the present. And the third type of overthinking that is possible is what I'm calling spinning. Spinning is fixating on details or choices of the present. And so this can look like little things like revising a 3-paragraph email 7 times before you hit send, or asking 12 different people to weigh in on the theme and colors for your upcoming birthday party. Or if you're a podcaster like me, it might look like spending 3 hours outlining the content for a 15-minute episode on a topic that you could probably riff off of the top of your head. So again, thinking about your options before making a decision and being thorough in your planning, that type of thinking is not inherently bad. But when your brain gets stuck on a mental hamster wheel so that you're expending a ton of energy but you can't actually move forward, that is not helpful because it makes it harder for you to get to where you want to be. So the antidote to spinning, if that's the type of overthinking that you're engaged in, is to practice taking action before you feel 100% ready. And this works because when perfectionists like us are trying to feel 100% ready, we're usually striving for a level of certainty and comfort and perfection that doesn't actually exist. And so we get stuck. And we're also usually trying to go from 0 to 60 instead of going from 0 to 10 or 0 to 5 because 5 and 10 just don't feel good enough. But going from 0 to 60 is too hard, and so we literally just stay stuck on 0. But if you tell yourself to act before you feel 100% ready, you're not going to try to go for 60 right out of the gate. You're going to scale back your first step to something that's more accessible to you, something your brain actually believes you can do. And so your brain lets you off the hamster wheel. And instead of spinning, you're taking action. So that's it. 3 kinds of overthinking, 3 simple strategies to help you counteract them. Your homework for this week is to try to identify which type of overthinking you're doing when it's happening, right? Just notice your overthinking and categorize it. Then, once you get used to identifying your overthinking, practice redirecting your thoughts in the ways that I described earlier in this episode. And of course, if you want dedicated guidance and support so that you can direct your thoughts to work for you instead of overthinking against yourself, I got you. You can sign up for my one-on-one coaching program and get all the support you need. Just use the link that's in the show notes to book a call with me to get started. And I cannot wait to get started. All right, folks, that's it and that's all for this week. I'll be back in your ears next week with another juicy episode. Until then, peace.